Some fights don't start with fists, they start with silence. Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't move to Belleview Lane to prove anything. He came for peace. But peace, it turns out, is something you have to defend, sometimes not with strength, but with stillness. And when three men tried to break that stillness, they woke something they didn't understand. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to subscribe. The sky over Bellevue Lane was the color of cold steel, heavy with a silence that clung to the rooftops like moss. Morning fog still lingered, curling low around mailboxes and picket fences like it didn't want to leave. On the edge of the lane, past a row of cracked sidewalks and tilting lamp posts, a black pickup truck rolled to a stop. Its engine coughed once, then died. The door opened slowly. He stepped out tall, broad-shouldered, his frame slightly stooped with age but still carved from discipline. His hair was silver now, beard flecked with white, and the jacket on his back had seen better days. He wore no watch, no logos, no smile, just calm eyes that had seen too much and expected little. In his hands, a toolbox, a folded tarp, and a backpack with one strap nearly torn off. He walked to the porch of the last house on the block. It leaned like it had been holding its breath for years, paint peeled in long strips from the siding. A broken shutter banged lightly in the wind. The front step sagged beneath his boots as he placed the toolbox down with care, like it was something sacred. No one waved, no one welcomed him, but someone was watching. Behind the curtain of the house across the street, a shape moved, quick, then still. A pair of eyes, curious, maybe afraid. Inside, the house smelled like dust and mildew and something older, deeper, like time itself had settled in the floorboards. The light switches didn't work. The faucet coughed instead of flowing, but he didn't curse or complain. He just examined, noted, and got to work. By noon, he had replaced the porch bulb, cleaned the gutters, and patched a hole in the kitchen ceiling. Not once did he speak. In the late afternoon, he stepped outside, wiped his hands with a rag, and sat on the porch's edge. From his pocket, he pulled a worn thermos and poured something steaming into the cap. He sipped it slowly, eyes never leaving the street. A boy on a rusted bike pedaled past, slowed slightly, then sped up again. A curtain twitched. A door clicked shut. The air was thick with something unspoken, like this street had grown used to staying quiet. He didn't mind. He didn't come here to make friends. He came here to be left alone. Later that evening, as he adjusted the porch railing with a rusted wrench, voices whispered from behind the neighbor's hedge. Two kids crouched low, peeking through the branches. One nudged the other and whispered, "That guy, my mom says he used to be like a governor or a superhero or something." The other kid frowned. "A superhero?" "Yeah," the first one nodded. "But she said not to go near him, said he's dangerous." The wind rustled the leaves. The man didn't turn. He didn't need to. He'd heard the whispers before in different towns, different languages, different lifetimes. They all sounded the same. He kept working, tightening the bolt until the wood no longer groaned. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across Bellevue Lane. One man, one broken house, one quiet street. And beneath it all, something waiting. The sun was low, casting a copper sheen across Bellevue Lane as Arnold crouched near the porch, steadying a warped stair tread with one knee. The old wood groaned in protest as he tightened a bolt with slow, deliberate force. Sweat beaded on his temple, but he worked in silence, like always, just the rhythm of breath, wood, and metal. He didn't look up when the sound came, an engine, louder than the others on the street. A pickup, not old, not new, but polished just enough to make a statement. It rumbled to a stop across the curb, idling too long. Then the engine cut. Three men got out. First was the driver, a thick-necked man in his 40s with a shaved head, sunglasses resting high on his forehead, and a leather vest over a faded military-style shirt. He walked like every step was owed to him. Behind him, a taller man with a twitch in his jawline and narrow eyes scanned the porch, then the street. The last was shorter, heavier, chewing something that wasn't gum. They didn't say a word at first. They just stood at the edge of the yard, watching. Arnold set down his wrench and stood slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. The big one stepped forward, hand extended, but not too far. "Evening," he said. Name, S. Dave Ruckman. This here's Roy and that's Dennis. We live close by. Arnold gave a nod, not moving closer. We noticed you moving in, saw you've been working on this place, figured we'd stop by, welcome you to Belleview Lane. His tone was pleasant. His eyes were not. Arnold's voice was even. I appreciate the visit. Dave chuckled. Yeah, well, thing is, around here we like to keep things peaceful, safe, you know, community spirit and all. He glanced over his shoulder as if to emphasize something invisible. We all do our part. No trouble, no nonsense. Keep the wrong kind of attention out. Arnold looked past them to the truck, then back. That sounds reasonable. Dave smiled wider, but there was no warmth in it. We got a little set up, informal like, $25 a week, helps keep the street quiet, unofficial contribution. Roy added, think of it like a neighborhood insurance policy. Dennis said nothing, just stared at the tools by Arnold's feet. Arnold's eyes didn't change. I don't pay for peace. Dave tilted his head. Don't think of it like paying, think of it like participating. Nobody likes being the odd one out. People get nervous when someone doesn't play ball. I'm not here to play, Arnold replied calmly. There was a pause. The street was too quiet. Even the breeze seemed to hold back. Roy took a step closer, his boots scuffing the sidewalk. You sure? It's not about the money. It's about showing you're part of this place. Arnold didn't move. I just got here, but I fix what I break. I stay out of trouble. That's all I intend to do. Dave's jaw tensed. The smile faded. All right, he said, taking a small step back. No pressure, we're just saying. Things run smoother when everyone understands each other. He turned toward the truck. Roy followed, but Dennis lingered a second longer. As he passed the base of the porch, he reached out and tapped the new column Arnold had just reinforced that morning, once, twice, his fingers drumming casually on the grain. He smirked, hope this holds through the night. Then they were gone. The truck started up, louder this time, and rolled slowly down the block. Arnold stood still, one hand resting on the porch rail. His face didn't flinch. But inside, the measure had begun, not of them. Of the line they were already too close to crossing. The rain didn't pour, it lingered. Light, constant, like the town itself was whispering disapproval. Bellevue Lane looked the same, but something had shifted. People who once peeked through curtains now closed them tighter. Lawn chairs disappeared from porches. Wind chimes were silenced. The street had gone from quiet to mute. Arnold noticed it the next morning. He walked to his mailbox and found the door hanging open, the metal bent inward. A muddy boot print marked the post. He knelt down, examined the damage, then stood without a word. He didn't fix it immediately. He just took note, like a soldier logging coordinates. The following day, he noticed 2 nails missing from the western side of his fence. The wood had been loosened deliberately, not kicked, not weathered, removed. Calculated, he repaired it that afternoon with slow precision, replacing the nails with longer ones, reinforcing the hinges. He didn't escalate, he fortified. It didn't stop. The scratch appeared across the side of his truck on a Tuesday. From fender to tailgate, long and deliberate, deep enough to show intent, but not to disable. The rain had washed away the dirt, leaving a clean, glinting scar. Arnold ran his hand along the metal, his fingers catching slightly on the edge. He didn't shake his head or curse. He simply walked to the back of the truck, fetched a cloth, and wiped it down. The worst came at the corner store. He walked in to buy roofing nails and a sack of brown rice. The man behind the counter, a clerk who had nodded at him 2 days before, froze. His eyes darted sideways. Then he cleared his throat and said flatly, "Sorry, sir. We can't ring that up." Arnold raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" The clerk didn't meet his eyes. "There's a note on your account, says there's a past due balance." Arnold stared a moment. "I've never opened an account." The clerk shrugged. "It's just what the register says. Maybe check with management." There was no management, just fear wearing a name tag. Arnold left the items on the counter and walked out. The sack of rice remained untouched until closing. Later that evening, he stood on his porch, thermos in hand, watching the fog roll in low over the pavement. A dog barked in the distance, but no lights turned on. He heard laughter, quick, muffled, then a door slammed. Across the street, a child was ushered inside with hurried hands. The town wasn't rejecting him, it was protecting itself from what it thought he'd brought with him, from what it feared would follow. In the mornings, Arnold trained, not for them. For himself, barefoot in the grass behind his house, he moved slowly, methodically, joint locks, balance drills, shoulder rolls, his breath visible in the cold. He didn't care if anyone watched. He did it because the rhythm mattered. Because discipline never retired. One morning, as he moved through a slow kata, he heard voices beyond the fence. Not loud, not whispering, just hushed enough to signal caution. "Guy gives me the creeps," one said. "Doesn't talk to anyone, just stares." A second voice replied, a little lower. "He doesn't scare easy, like he's seen worse." A pause, like what? Another pause, then, "I don't know, but it ain't us." The footsteps moved away. Arnold finished the form, held the final stance a beat longer, then exhaled. They were testing him, not with fists, with silence, with sideways glances and whispered pressure. It wasn't the kind of fight most people noticed, but Arnold did. He had lived it in boardrooms, in back alleys, on sound stages, and in government halls. The uniform changed. The tactics stayed the same. He didn't fear them, but he knew exactly what they were trying to build. And more importantly, how fast it could fall apart. The rain came down in sheets, not gentle, not rhythmic, but punishing, like the sky itself had decided to press its weight onto Belleview Lane. The street was dark, unnaturally so. Porch lights that had once glowed faintly were now switched off. Windows were closed, curtains drawn. Even the usual flicker of a television screen was absent. The whole block held its breath. Arnold stepped out onto the porch, the trash bin creaking slightly as he dragged it down the path. His coat was thick, but the rain soaked through it anyway. Drops ran down his neck, clinging to the collar like cold fingers. He didn't hurry. He didn't glance around. The routine mattered. Routine meant control. As he reached the end of the walkway, near the edge of the alley, the sound of boots on wet pavement broke the rhythm. Not rushing, just deliberate enough to be felt. He looked up. Dave stood 10 feet away, the rain flattening his hair to his scalp, his vest plastered to his arms like second skin. Behind him were Roy and Dennis, no fake smiles this time, no pretending. They weren't here to talk. Arnold said nothing. He kept one hand on the trash bin lid, the other resting at his side. "You put your trash out on the wrong night," Dave said flatly. Arnold looked at the bin, then back at him. "I don't think this is about garbage." Dave took a step forward. "No," he said, "it's about respect. You've been here 2 weeks and you haven't shown any." Roy moved behind Arnold, cutting off the path back to the house. Dennis circled wide, flanking the other side. They boxed him in with the kind of precision that doesn't need coordination. It comes from practice. The kind of violence that knows its way around dark alleys. Arnold still didn't move. His eyes stayed on Dave. "You think you're better than us," Dave said. "Too good to join in, too good to pay. Maybe you think we're scared of you." Arnold's voice was calm. "I don't think about you." That did it. Dave lunged forward, grabbing Arnold by the front of his coat and slamming him back into the wooden fence. The boards groaned under the impact. Arnold didn't grunt. He didn't raise his hands. He just let the shock absorb through his spine. Then came the forearm, thick, heavy, pressing across his throat. Not fast, not wild, just slow, deliberate pressure. The kind that's meant to take the air away a little at a time. The kind that says, "I want you to feel every second of this." Rain poured over them, bouncing off trash can lids, running down faces, filling ears with its roar. Arnold's boots slid slightly on the wet grass. His breath shortened, vision narrowed. But still he didn't resist. Not yet. His mind reached backward. Past the pain, past the fence, past the years, to a dojo in Vienna, to an instructor who had once said, "When you're under pressure, your body wants to panic. That's when your mind must become the anchor." He waited. Measured the angle, the shift in Dave's weight, the sound of Roy moving closer behind. He counted it out, breath by breath. Then he moved. Arnold dropped his center of gravity, sliding to the right just enough to unseat Dave's balance. His knee came up hard into Dave's shin, not to injure, but to disrupt. Dave flinched, and that was enough. In one motion, Arnold rotated into the pressure, turned under the choking arm, and brought his elbow up into the inside of Dave's joint. His shoulder dropped, twisting Dave's body off balance. The big man stumbled. Arnold spun low, swept Dave's legs clean, and sent him crashing into the mud. 15 seconds, maybe less, Roy lunged. Arnold intercepted the movement, grabbed the wrist midair, pivoted, and sent Roy down with a shoulder lock that landed hard. Dennis raised his fists, charged forward. Arnold sidestepped, grabbed his jacket collar, and used the man's momentum to redirect him straight into the fence. The impact echoed. Dennis stayed down. Arnold stood still for a moment, rain running off the brim of his hood, breathing steady. The three men groaned in the mud. No one spoke. He looked down at Dave, who was coughing now, one hand clutched to his knee. Arnold's voice cut through the rain. "I came here for peace. If you're looking for war, find someone else." Then he turned, walked back up the path without looking back. The trash bin remained where it was, lid half open, forgotten in the storm. Behind him, the street remained silent, except this time it wasn't fear, it was shame. And somewhere behind a curtain, someone watched without blinking. The morning air was sharp, the kind that made breath hang in the wind like smoke. Clouds moved fast overhead, low and restless, as if the storm hadn't fully left. Puddles dotted the street in broken reflections, and on the pavement near the alley, a thin trail of mud and something darker stretched across the concrete, faded now, but not gone. No sirens came, no flashing lights. Bellevue Lane didn't work like that. Arnold stepped outside before sunrise, same boots, same coat. He carried a spade in one hand, a small trowel in the other. His breath was steady, his pace unhurried. He walked past the bin, still sitting where he'd left it, and didn't so much as glance toward the corner where it had happened. He knelt by the side garden and began turning the soil. The fence creaked softly in the wind. From behind closed windows, faces watched. They didn't move the curtains, they didn't wave, but they were there. Across the street, Mrs. Kent's porch light flicked on, then off. The boy who used to ride his bike at dusk hadn't been seen since the week before. Today, though, a small shoeprint appeared near the edge of Arnold's sidewalk, half in mud, half in gravel. No sound followed it. By mid-morning, Arnold had rebuilt the corner of the fence that Dennis had cracked when his body hit it the night before. He replaced 2 rails, hammered in new braces, sanded the top edge smooth. His hands worked like machines, but his mind was elsewhere. This wasn't about the fight. He'd had fights before, real ones, the kind that left scars you couldn't see. This was about something older, something quieter. What a man chooses to become when no one's clapping, when no one believes in him but himself. Behind the window across from him, a curtain moved. Just a flick, then stillness. He straightened his back slowly, bones creaking, and lifted the broken trellis from where it had fallen near the tomato bed. Rain had drowned half the roots, but the stems that survived were upright, reaching again. He wiped the leaves gently with a towel and realigned the stakes. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement, a figure, small, no taller than the gate latch. A boy, maybe 7. He walked alone up the sidewalk, shoes squishing on the wet concrete. He didn't look scared, just cautious, like someone delivering something fragile. Arnold didn't speak. He kept working. The boy reached the gate, paused, then slid something through the bars. A folded piece of paper, no envelope, no name, just the sound of paper brushing metal. Then he turned and left, not running, just walking fast enough to mean it. Arnold waited until he was gone, then picked up the note. The handwriting was crooked, written in thick crayon. "Thank you, Mom said I slept good last night." There was nothing else, no signature, no drawing, just that. Arnold folded it once, tucked it into his pocket, and returned to his work, not because it was done, but because it mattered. Because this was what strength looked like when no one asked for it, when it had no audience. By sunset, the street was still quiet. The truck from the Ruckman house hadn't moved, no laughter spilled from porches, but something had cracked. Not like broken glass, like ice thawing. Arnold sat on the steps, thermos in hand, watching the sky turn red behind the trees. He didn't smile, he didn't sigh, but he stayed, and that said more than enough. The days passed without announcement. 1 week, maybe more. Bellevue Lane still wore its usual coat of fog in the morning and quiet in the evening, but something had shifted. Not loud, not sudden. just a slow turning of the air, like a door easing open after years of being stuck. Arnold kept his routine. Every morning, just after dawn, he stepped into the backyard barefoot, arms loose at his sides, breath visible in the crisp air. He moved slowly, deliberately, elbows rising, shoulders rolling, feet pressing gently into the wet grass. No music, no audience, just the quiet rhythm of a body remembering discipline. The second morning, they appeared, two children sitting cross-legged on the other side of the fence. One had a juice box. The other held a plastic ninja sword across his lap. They didn't say anything, they just watched. Arnold didn't acknowledge them, but the next day he shifted his stance slightly so they could see his footing better. On the fourth day, a third child joined. He had a notebook and a pencil, but never wrote anything down. In the afternoons, Arnold worked on the garage. The door had been warped since the first rain, and the frame didn't close properly. He planed the edge, sealed the bottom, and repainted it in quiet sections, never rushing. He sanded the top of an old wooden bench that someone had left by the curb. It would take 3 more days to finish. He didn't mind. One morning, a covered dish appeared on his porch. No knock. No note except for a slip of paper beneath the foil. "Thank you." The handwriting was small, tidy. The dish was still warm, peach cobbler. He didn't need to read the name to know who it was from. Mrs. Kent, 2 houses down. The one whose porch light flickered the day after the fight. He returned the dish the next morning, cleaned, with a single clementine placed inside. On Thursday, Mr. Hollins wandered by with 2 fishing poles slung over one shoulder. He didn't say a word, just nodded and handed one over. They sat by the water behind the park for 2 hours, nothing bit. Arnold didn't ask for conversation. Hollins didn't offer it. They shared half a sandwich and didn't speak until it was time to go. Arnold passed a girl with a flat tire at the edge of the curb the next afternoon. She was maybe 9, her helmet lopsided, hands on her hips. Her mother was at work. She asked if he had a wrench. He fixed the chain, adjusted the brakes, wiped her hands with a clean rag. When he handed the bike back, she looked up and said, "You're not mean like Mom said." Arnold nodded once. That was enough. At night he sat on the porch like always, the same thermos, the same wooden chair, but now the silence felt different. It wasn't hiding, it was resting. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime returned. A porch swing creaked. The street was learning how to breathe again. Then one morning, just before sunrise, Arnold paused during his warm-up. Not because of pain, because of sound, a hammer, repeating steady, not frantic, not professional either. He turned his head slightly toward the Ruckman house. A figure stood on the roof, sleeves rolled up, shoulders hunched. Alone, Dave, no truck, no brothers, no crowd. Just a man with a rusted hammer and a bent nail pouch, replacing warped shingles one at a time. Arnold didn't call out, he didn't wave. He simply turned back to his breath, lowered into a stance, and began the next form. And the street, for once, moved with him. The sun hung low over Belleview Lane, casting long shadows that stretched across cracked sidewalks and peeling fences. It was that hour of the day when everything slows down, when the light feels older, softer, like it's remembering something. Arnold sat on the porch, his hands resting on his knees, thermos beside him, eyes fixed on the horizon but not really watching it. The street was quiet, not tense like before, not frozen, just still. Then came the footsteps. Slow, steady, no gravel crunch, no boots stomping, just shoes worn thin, hitting the concrete with purpose but no demand. Arnold didn't look up at first. He didn't need to. Dave Ruckman stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He wasn't wearing his vest. No sunglasses, no brothers at his back. Just jeans, a plain t-shirt, and 2 hands shoved deep into his pockets like they weren't sure what to do with themselves. They stood in silence for a long beat. A breeze passed between them, lifted a curl of dust from the gutter, and moved on. Dave cleared his throat. "I'm not here to make a scene." Arnold gave the smallest nod, nothing more. I figured I owed you something," Dave said, his voice quieter than it had ever been. "Not an apology, not yet, just a few words." Arnold said nothing. Silence was still the best mirror. Dave shifted on his feet, looking down, then out toward the street like he expected someone to call him back. No one did. When I was a kid, Dave said slowly, I didn't have a whole lot of order. Dad was in and out. Mom did her best, but she was tired. You know the type. He paused, so I made my own rules. Made sure people listened to me or got out of the way. Fear was easy, reliable. Arnold's eyes stayed on him. I always thought silence was weakness, Dave continued. Like if someone didn't shout back, they had nothing to stand on. You didn't yell, you didn't even flinch. I thought that made you soft. He let out a breath. I was wrong. Another long pause. Dave looked up, eyes clearer than before. You didn't fight me to win. You fought because you refused to bend. I've never seen that before, not like that. Arnold finally spoke. His voice was calm, steady, but with the weight of stone. Silence isn't weakness. Silence means you're strong enough not to need noise. Dave nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. I think I'm starting to get that. He took one hand out of his pocket and rubbed the back of his neck. I was a lost kid for a long time, he said quietly. Truth is, I wish I'd met someone like you earlier. Maybe things would have turned out different. Arnold didn't answer. He didn't have to. Dave stepped back once, then twice, hands falling to his sides. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just turned and walked back the way he came, each step lighter than the one before. The sun dipped lower behind the trees. The porch light across the street blinked on. Somewhere, a screen door creaked open, then closed again. Arnold reached for his thermos, took a sip, and returned to stillness. And the street, for once, stayed quiet, not out of fear, but out of respect. The sun rose slow and steady over Belleview Lane, spilling golden light across rooftops and warming the cracks in the sidewalks. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, the street sounded alive. A hose hissed across the road where a man watered his lawn. Laughter echoed faintly as two kids chased a soccer ball near the curb. Someone was grilling breakfast, eggs, or maybe sausage. The smell drifted on the breeze like a quiet invitation. Arnold sat on his porch, a paperback open in one hand, the other resting on the arm of the old wooden chair he had rebuilt weeks ago. The hinges no longer groaned when he shifted. The porch no longer sagged beneath him, and the house behind him no longer looked like it was holding its breath. He turned a page slowly, not because the story was dull, but because there was no reason to rush. A bird landed on the edge of the railing, blinked once, and flew off again. It was that kind of morning. Down the sidewalk came the sound of sneakers, light, quick, uneven. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, stopped at the edge of Arnold's walkway. His hair was a mess, his shirt untucked, and his hands clutched a folded magazine tight against his chest. He didn't say anything at first, just looked up. Arnold closed his book and waited. The boy stepped forward, held out the comic. I drew it, he said. It's you. Arnold took it gently. The cover showed a rough sketch of a man with broad shoulders, standing tall, while 3 cartoonish bullies lay scattered around him. Above the drawing, in big block letters, were the words, "The Man Who Didn't Move." Arnold smiled, small and quiet. I think you're like a superhero, the boy said, but not the kind with lasers or stuff, the kind who just stays. Arnold looked down at the drawing again, then back at the boy. I'm not a superhero, he said calmly. I just don't like being pushed. The boy nodded like he understood, even if he didn't fully. He turned and ran back down the sidewalk, feet slapping against the concrete, arms swinging with purpose. He didn't look back. Arnold set the comic beside his book and leaned back in his chair. The breeze stirred the pages. A dog barked 2 houses down. A woman walked past with a stroller and offered a small wave. Arnold returned it with a nod. Across the street, the house with the broken mailbox, the one that had never turned its lights on, never opened its blinds, showed a flicker of movement. Just the curtain shifting slightly, like someone inside had taken one cautious step forward. It didn't stay open long, but it moved. Arnold didn't react. He'd seen change before. He knew it didn't come all at once. It came in inches. In quiet choices, in doors unlocked slowly. The street breathed finally, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of something earned. Arnold picked up the comic again, thumbed the edge with care, then set it down and opened his book once more. The sun climbed higher, the children laughed louder, and the man who didn't move stayed exactly where he was, steady, still, enough. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.